Long time, Stan.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining today. We appreciate y'all being here. We'll give folks just a few more minutes to hop on. So in the meantime, we can get to know our panelists. We'll do some more formal intros in just a bit. But let's hear about some summer plans. I feel like that's the most fun icebreaker I can think of. I know Stan's in a good spot right now. So Stan, you want to tell us a bit about your summer plans and where you're at?
Yeah, I'm living it right now. I'm in a little area called North Coast Village, close to Oceanside. So enjoying a little R&R that we do every year. My family just loves this area, and we come here every summer. So enjoying some nice R&R up here for a few days.
Nice.
Amazing. We caught Stan on vacation. That's how much he likes us. Okay.
Yeah, my marketing person basically said Thursday, and I was thinking it was last week. And once I commit, I follow through, and here we are. You got it.
Here we are. Okay, let's go ahead and go to Jay next.
Yeah, I actually just finished my summer plans. We just spent a few days in London and a few days in Paris. Got out of there right before all of the heat wave and fires and all that stuff. It was like a nice, cool low in the high 50s and high in the very low 70s while we were there. So we really enjoyed it.
Wait, where were you exactly, Jeff?
We spent 4 days in London and then took the train over to Paris and spent 5 days over in Paris.
Nice. Good for you.
That was great. Much needed first trip for my kids in 2.5 years. So they were happy to go too.
That's awesome. How old are your kids?
12 and 14.
Okay, so they're like an age you can actually travel with without it being too terrible, hopefully.
Yeah, we traveled with them when they were younger, and it was adventurous. We'll say.
Yeah, it's a feat to accomplish for sure.
Now it's like phone and headphones. Okay, we're good. They'll go anywhere.
Yeah, you're set. Hop on the train, go. All right, let's go ahead, Eric. Summer plans.
Well, I learned, unfortunately, last week that summer's already halfway over, which is just always so depressing. Also, when you live in San Francisco, it's questionable whether or not you actually get to experience summer. It's a high of 61 today. But no, it's been a good summer. I spent a couple weeks in Maui, and I think the big thing coming up is Burning Man is back this year. So heading out to the desert in a couple weeks. But yeah, that's
a big plan. That's exciting.
Yeah, it should be really fun. I don't know. Jay, you ever been?
Never been.
Stan?
I've never been.
Just a bucket list item or what?
Not for me, but I want to hear more about that on a side conversation because I've heard a lot about it.
Yeah.
I'm more of I'll live vicariously through you, Eric. So
that's me too. I'm with you, Jay. 100%.
Fair enough.
Awesome. Okay, great. Well, it looks like we've had a few more folks be able to join us here. We can go ahead and get started. So today we are here to talk about comp plans and the cost of complacency within them. So we're excited about the amazing content and takeaways you'll get out of this event. We have 3 incredible panelists here today. We have Jay Wallace, the VP of Worldwide Sales at Rumble. We have Eric Martin, the head of sales at Vanta. And we have Stan James, VP of sales at Spiff. So we'll get into the intros in just a bit. You'll hear more from these guys. Before we get into it, I will risk pointing out the potentially obvious and say that this is indeed a Modern Sales Pros event. So for those of you not familiar, Modern Sales Pros is the world's largest growing community of sales in management, leadership, sales and RevOps, sales enablement, aka our Modern Sales Pros. We are now at 27K plus thanks to our lovely summit. And our mission is to create an environment for our members to answer questions they'd struggle to solve on their own and to help them see around corners they may not know about. So we do that through live events like this one you're about to see, our online forum, our quarterly summits, and we are getting back to in-person events, which is very exciting for everyone. So if you're not already a part of MSP, you will be invited to join after the event. Don't worry, it's a great spot to be in. And now, enough about MSP. We will go ahead and move on to our sponsor of the day, which is Spiff. So I'll hand it off to Stan to say a few words about Spiff. Go ahead.
Thanks, Joni. Yeah, anytime we have an opportunity to participate in an event, especially around comp, it's near and dear to our hearts because that's what we do. Spiff is a new class of commission automation software that really does a few things: builds trust, it draws motivation, and it aligns organizations and departments to really drive to the end state, which is hitting revenue targets. So excited to have the opportunity to sponsor this event and hang out with Jay, Joni, and Eric. Excited to proceed.
We're excited you're here. Okay, great. So now that we know a bit more about Spiff, we will cover some ground rules before we dive in. First off, this event is indeed being recorded. You'll be able to access this recording and all the key takeaways on our previous events page post-event. I'll be sending you some follow-up email. You'll get to see all of that there. Second, and the most important part, is if you have a question or any comments or anything for our speakers, we want to make it as interactive as possible. So feel free to pop that in the Q&A or the chat. We'd love to hear from you. Let us know where you're calling in from. Let us know your summer plans, any comp-related things, any non-comp-related things. We're here for it. So we can go ahead and get introduced to our panelists. First up, we have Stan James, the VP of Spiff, who you heard from just a minute ago. Stan, go ahead and tell us a little more about yourself.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm a Utah native. That's where also Spiff is headquartered. So that's nice and convenient. But I've been at Spiff for a little over 2.5 years. Started there, into the first million to where we are today. So I've seen some explosive growth. It's been a lot of fun. And with that, and inherently, that brings new sets of challenges. But been in software, SaaS, for a little over 25 years. Most of that, or 2/3 of that, in leadership, and have had a really good experience working with a lot of great market leaders throughout. And thus, the topic today, I've seen a lot of great and a lot of not so great, and excited to see where it goes. But have 4 kids, all of which are keeping us busy. So that's a little bit about me.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, next we will pass to Jay Wallace, the VP of Worldwide Sales at Rumble. Go ahead.
Yeah, hey everyone. So Jay Wallace, I lead the sales team, sales, revenue, renewals, pretty much if it touches revenue in any kind of way at Rumble. I run that portion of the business. Rumble's a pretty young company. We've been around for just a couple of years, but seen pretty tremendous growth over the last couple of years, and have had to figure out everything from the ground up, especially things around compensation, and have gone through our bouts of making complicated comp plans to, hey, this is way too complicated, we should make this simple. So we've got a little experience building it from the ground up. So excited to be here. I reside in Austin, Texas, where it's a scorching 103 or 104 today. You pick your number above 100. That's what it's been for the last few weeks. So I wish I was either in Utah or California, like some other folks on this call. Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. I hope you're cranking that AC over there. Okay, and last but certainly not least, we have Eric Martin, the head of sales at Vanta, who will be our moderator for the day. So Eric, go ahead, introduce yourself and take it away. I'll hop off and be back on at the end just for some
Awesome.
notes.
Thank you so much, Joni. Jay, I think I read this morning that Austin has exceeded 100 degrees every day for the past 40 days.
That is correct.
Wow.
Yeah, so congratulations, I guess.
Yeah. We're all about winning here, Eric.
Yeah, exactly. Setting records out in Austin. In any case, once again, really excited to be here. Eric Martin, head of sales over at Vanta. We are the kind of like leader in the new, or I should say the new and nascent connected cloud compliance and security category. TLDR, we help automate things like SOC 2, ISO 27001, et cetera, to help sales teams accelerate growth and help companies de-risk their business. But in any case, like the two gentlemen I'm with today, this is, I think I share their interest in this topic. We've all had our kind of various experiences with compensation, whether we were on one side of the table or the other, as a seller, as a leader, you name it. So I am selfishly really excited to learn a lot. And we're going to keep this as conversational as we can, as I mentioned. So please keep the questions coming. Let's see though, Joni, can we go to the next slide? Cool. So from an agenda standpoint, as I just mentioned, today we're going to talk about compensation philosophies. If you're like me, you're like, compensation philosophies sound sophisticated. We're going to break that down. We're going to specifically talk about these philosophies that retain and scale. TLDR, as we know, competitive companies are changing strategies, with data at the forefront. That is certainly true with us here at Vanta. In this session, we're going to talk about a few things in particular. And once again, we're going to riff. So don't worry, but we're going to cover 3 things for sure. That is 1, developing compensation principles that turn goals into actions. We're going to talk about future-proofing your comp philosophy to reduce churn and stay alive in a, dare I say, recession. And we're going to talk about practicing data-driven management to put these goals into action. Towards the end, this topic might go a little broader, but certainly compensation will be top of mind throughout. Let's go to the next slide. Great. All right, first things first, developing compensation principles that turn goals into action. Once again, right, like the goal here is for us to make this as kind of educational as possible. I think to kick this off, I guess first things first, we're going to be covering revenue analysis. Stan, let's kick it off to you. And I mentioned in the kind of backstage, first things first, can you just explain what a compensation principle is before we talk about actually developing compensation principles?
Yeah, to me, compensation principles are really the components that drive your strategy and which align to your company goals. And so, when we were setting up at Spiff this year, what were the key strategies around growth? What are the key strategies around hitting a certain target? What kind of talent were we looking to attract? Everything that we do around the comp plan. Because again, I'm going to backtrack just a quick second. I think honestly, if a comp plan is done right, that's likely going to be one of your greatest assets, not just in acquisition, but also in retention of great talent. And it's interesting because when I think about where we are, and we're going to get into this in a little bit later, so I'll kind of withhold to a little bit here, but I would say that most of the folks I talk to and in my network, they're still hiring. They are thinking about capital efficiency, but there is still a need to make sure that the comp plan or comp strategy is aligned well enough to hit their goals as an organization. So I think it's really the North Star in terms of what's your comp strategy, what are the components in there that really drive to the outcome you're looking for as an organization.
Yeah. Who do you find generally owns compensation, right? So like the Jay and Stan, you can speak to this kind of in terms of like your relationship with owning comp in your respective leadership roles. But like Stan, y'all are selling this, right? This software. And like, I'm curious, like, I'm sure it varies depending on the size of the company, but like, who are you seeing either owning or co-owning kind of these strategies when it comes to comp?
Yeah, when it comes to comp, in my experience, it's usually Jay, myself, you, those that own the number. Usually we're the quarterback. And what I've typically found is obviously there's more than us that handle it, but it obviously is a CRO or just the person that runs the revenue typically has the biggest stake into the comp overall strategy, because collaboration's everything. And I think a really effective comp plan is you got to have someone that owns it. And typically, and again, to your question, it starts with your CEO, in my opinion, but that usually trickles down to someone that needs to quarterback and run it, draw the collaboration, align to the company objectives, rally around all the departments so that everyone has the same objective and goal in mind. And then the comp plan at that point is then, from my experience, developed, and usually it's the head of sales, revenue leader that is quarterbacking that.
Yeah. Jay, who owned it at Rumble before you were there?
Yeah. So I founded the sales team at Rumble. There was only 3 people when I signed my offer letter. So you can probably guess who came up with the comp plan. I worked really closely with my CEO, to Stan's point. We kind of figured out what do we want, what do we need out of this year, looked at what our board goals were. And ultimately, we have a couple of editions of the same SKU. So we didn't have to get too complicated. We were just going through our first round of first year renewals. So we just figured out incentivizing renewals and incentivizing new business made a lot of sense. Let's make it very simple. In our first year, we got very aggressive with the renewals portion too, because we needed to protect our base. We weren't quite sure the product was growing. And so there was just a lot of, let's start from ground zero. What are the things that are really important to us? And then working really, really closely with my CEO. Now, as we've grown up and we've got people in operations and we've got people in finance, and, we actually have like department heads To Stan's point earlier, collaboration is super key. When we were coming up with our comp plans for this year, it was really all about what did we see last year, what worked, what didn't, what do we want to double down on. It as an idea, like one of the philosophies we had is like, hey, instead of hiring 100 headcount in carbon territories very small, we could just keep like turning the knob with what should we actually assign for quota, or we could have gone another direction. We decided to keep quotas low so that our reps can overachieve and just look at carving territories, not super aggressively this year, because we are still thinking we could get a lot out of it. But I don't think if we would have had all the data collected from last year without a good operations person, without really digging into it, there's no way we would have figured out what we needed to incentivize this year.
Yeah, that makes sense. Speaking from experience at Vanta, so I joined as one of the first employees over 3 years ago, and like I like yourself, Jay, just owned kind of like the coming up of the initial comp plan, and it kind of persisted for the first few years. I think keyword until we kind of like really hired and built out our ops team, and like to this day, like we partner very closely with them. In fact, they are kind of, I would say, more of the driver than anyone else in terms of kind of like helping us to kind of be thoughtful with kind of, to your point, like data on kind of what the comp plan should be. I think, Jay, you mentioned something interesting there where, like you said, you looked at kind of what worked and what didn't work, right? Like for people that are listening, like what does that mean? Like how are you measuring, and Stan, I want to hear your answer too, but like how are you measuring kind of whether or not a comp plan is working or not?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things. One is, salespeople are going to do what you incent them to do, right? That's the nature of our business. We want to follow the comp plan, understand the comp plan, and then go work the comp plan. One of the things we did last year was we gave quota relief on renewals. So this was our first year going through renewals. We wanted to make sure to be super aggressive with renewals. Once we found what our renewal rate was, we decided, okay, that's probably not the thing that we want to incentivize. We want to really think about growth in the next year. So we kind of turned the knobs and also carved out mid-market versus enterprise. There was a lot of functionality change that happened towards the last part of the year. So for us, what I wouldn't call it didn't work. I would more so say it's probably not going to work this year, if that makes sense. So just about reflecting and saying, cool, it made a lot of sense for the stage that we were in. But now as we venture into the new year, there's a new thing that we need, a new thing that we've committed, bigger number to the board. We've kind of got an idea of what our retention numbers look like with or without incenting anyone to do so. So we made a lot of structural changes to our comp plan in that manner. Again, not so much that it didn't work, more so that it was good for last year, but may not be good for this year.
Yeah, I love that. Really interesting. It's like, and very like relevant to where we are now, where historically kind of AEs were responsible for net new revenue and CSMs were responsible for expansion. We've just now kind of like switched gears such that AEs are responsible for both. And like, we are in this kind of experimental phase in terms of like, to your point, creating the right incentives for the AEs who kind of now carry kind of the sum of both numbers. But Stan, how do you all kind of measure whether or not comp plans are working? And if not kind of internally, how does your kind of sales team advise your customers on like how to know if things are working or not?
Yeah, I have a couple thoughts, and I just want to make one other just adjustment to my earlier comment. I think from our perspective, it sounds like we're more in the 1 to 25 million ARR perspective. I will say, having had worked at larger companies, because when Jay had mentioned a great ops leader, when there is a good rev ops or a finance org that's a little bit has more depth, more bench. Typically, they'll take a little bit of a heavier role in my experience working with the sales leaders. But I would say once the goals and objectives are nailed down, the finance teams that I've worked with have just been top notch in executing on the plan and developing it. So just shout out to all of our finance friends out there. I would be remiss if I didn't go back and give them a shout out because they're phenomenal. But generally, the comp plans are just not a set it and forget it. Like I think all of us went through 2020 and if you think about that, and I think there was a stat that my marketing team pulled out recently from a survey, those that responded, 90% from what I recall, changed some element of their comp plan. If we think about that for a second, if we're not constantly inspecting our plans and are they working, I think we're missing an opportunity to test our hypothesis, because again, this goes back to science, psychology, and you. There's, they hired the leader for a reason because they have experience, but when I started at Spiff, we had just less than $1 million in ARR. There just wasn't a lot of data, and we were supposed to grow our team 2x, 3x, 4x. And how do you do that? Build a comp plan that drives to the North Star without having a ton of data. So, and then how do you compensate a team that, Eric, you had mentioned that you're moving into different segments. Like, how do you really know how to do that without having a lot of historicals with the product and the go-to-market strategy? And so it's just always an iterative motion. And I think the process that we look at is, last year, I like what Jay said is, what didn't work last year or what worked last year may not work this year. We actually set a goal last year at Spiff to make everything annual. We no longer need that because 95% of our contracts are now annual, meaning it's default, it's our standard. And so we can look at that from a quarterly perspective. Now, I'm not recommending that we make that kind of frequent change because that'll drive reps nuts. But if there are certain things that just aren't working, it's okay to make a pivot, to make a change to help move to the North Star, which comes back to the founding principles. So I would just, say another example of that would be for me, we had in a comp plan a self-sourcing incentive. It just didn't move the needle. What we actually found was that was more of a frontline manager accountability metric that we were looking to manage to, and that drove the needle more. And so it is a constant inspection, an iterative process. What's working, what's not working, because there are things that move the needle more than others.
Yeah, I love it. Wow, yeah, this topic hits. It hits deep. In any case, Joni, let's go to the next slide. Cool. So I guess, second point here, how do we keep up? So dare I say, like, there's a certain recession coming, but let's say it's looking likely. Jay, let's start with you. How are you future-proofing kind of your comp philosophy over there to reduce churn and I hate to use the word stay alive, but like stay alive?
Yeah. I mean, so the real answer is like we kind of prepped for something like this last year. I mean, when we were really thinking about how do we want to compensate reps, we have a firm enterprise business and we have a firm mid-market business. And one of the things that we needed to change was we needed to bring in somebody full-time because of the volume of mid-market deals that we have. But whereas we have a lot of revenue in enterprise, we don't have as many enterprise customers. And so what we did was we continued to incentivize and compensate based off of renewals for the enterprise. We brought in a full-time employee to handle renewals. So for mid-market. So we kind of split the comp plan already. It helped us actually prepare for something like this to happen. We didn't do it intentionally. So it was kind of good intention that it just worked out for us. But I do think I see the bullet here on paying reps on renewals. I think it's really important you incentivize your reps to do exactly what kind of behavior you would like them to do. So making things like, if we do enter into a recession and that means that mid-year you need to change the way that you go about your comp plan, it doesn't mean that you need to bump everyone's OTE, but you can change the types of components that are involved in your comp plan so that everybody still wins. You still get what the company goals need. And hopefully the reps are really happy with that. I mean, conceptually, renewals should always be the easier thing, right? But if you don't pay attention to them, if you're not reaching at least 90 days out in advance of the renewal, or what we do here is we do 120 days out just to get the conversation going. We initially did that because we thought, well, if we reach out 120 days out, then we'll get an expansion opportunity. Now we're kind of reaching out for a different reason, make sure that we can still secure the revenue. So I think that the way that you incentivize your reps to behave is always ultimately how they're going to behave, especially if you put in accelerators. And if you notice that there's a slip in your renewals and you see churn stepping up, then there's a lot of things you can do around accelerators. And that goes back to just having a good operations person. Maybe it costs you a little bit more on the payout this year, but if you survive by keeping all your revenue or at least most of it and reducing your churn, I'd say it's a win for the business.
Yeah, makes sense. Jay, let's touch on the accelerators for a second. Like, what's your experience been in terms of like designing accelerators into comp plans? And I don't know, any kind of like lessons learned that folks listening might kind of benefit from hearing? Yeah,
I mean, life starts at 100%, right? I think that's always the perception that a rep has. Like, they should never be shooting for just hitting 100%. That kind of means you did the bare minimum. I think most people get into sales because they want to make a lot of money. They want to overachieve. You tend to that sales tends to attract A personalities that want to really dig their heels in and do as much as they possibly can. So we put 2 bands in last year, 2 not super wide bands. As a result, I mean, a lot of people were well paid last year. A lot of people did very, very well. This year, we decided that we want to continue to incent that behavior. So we made the bands a little bit wider, but it's something where everyone can participate. And we changed ours a little bit to really incentivize those big accelerators can be made with new revenue, because that's the focus for this year. However, as I mentioned, for enterprise, we didn't want them to take their eye off the ball for renewals. So there's still some things that we're coming into our fiscal year, our fiscal quarter end next week. So, we're always looking at ways that we could potentially tweak it if we need to. The one thing that I'm always weary of is because, like Stan, most of our business is annual contract. Changing comp plans on reps mid-year or every couple of quarters, or even like tweaking it too much in the middle of a cycle. For instance, we carved out mid-market, officially hired a director of mid-market to come run that sales team earlier this year, which means that the 2 directors I had running sales for East and West, now we have to kind of rework their comp plan. But it's a good opportunity to make sure that they're incentivized to do the things, again, that we really want them to do, which is focus on enterprise sales and growth. Some of the lessons learned, though, when we did our sales engineering comp plans, we had those tied directly to individual reps. Well, we realized pretty quickly, hey, we still plan on hiring here, right? So that's going to be really hard to do that. So we're actually changing that the comp plans to a more regional based comp plan where they can still participate, that the ball's not moving for them. But that was a mistake in hindsight. We should have never rolled it out as a rep by rep basis, because that's something that the sales engineers can't really control. But they can control the region that they own. So if I had to do it all over again, we would never would have rolled that plan out. But luckily, being flexible and listening to your sales team, you've got to be willing to be okay making a change and realizing you made a mistake.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you for sharing. And for any of your reps listening, there you go. Your leader making an admission there. Stan, let's start with kind of how you all think about accelerators and then work backwards to anything you might have done to like future-proof comp plans.
Yeah, I don't think we're too far off from what Jay just described, and I think we think about it very similarly. From an accelerator perspective, we looked at our business last year, and when we were in that collaborative state with the executive team, and I was talking to my finance person, and I was like, okay, we're doing really well with our annual, but the impact of collecting up front beyond the first year. So maybe collecting more than a year. What would that do to our business? And it was substantial. Like, it blew my mind. I'm not a finance person by trade, and I that definitely don't think like a CFO. But the impact that would have on our business was substantial. And so we implemented a few things that would help with our run rate, what would help with our retention, what helped with several things for our business that were super influential for long-term viability. And so we made some changes in terms of accelerators to do so. We looked at also last year, and we're looking at the accelerators from overachievement. Was a yearly look different from a quarterly look? And we saw some trends and differences there. And so, it's just always inspecting, always looking and making the improvements that move the needle. And we did the same thing last year as well. We added a mid-market team. And so about the same time. So last year. So kind of went through that same process, and I'm anxious to hear a little bit more, Jay, about your experience with that. Maybe we don't have time on this call, but certainly would love to hear more about it. But the other things that I think about when it comes to recession proofing, I think we have to be able to talk about it. We have to be open about it. Just think about, I think about it from my rep's perspective. Any little thing that you talk about from an executive perspective or maybe a team perspective, there's just a lot of sensitivity around it right now. And it's okay to communicate and be open about it, in my opinion. And, when I think about, other things that we do, I think the article that I read, I believe it was an HBR study or blog, they talked about the best time to strengthen your business is before the recession, before it hits, and having thoughts and preparation around it. One of the things that we did that my CRO brought to the table recently when we had our sales offsite is we talked about our team. We talked about the talent. Like, how How do we help those that are struggling? And what are the action items that we can take to make them more successful? What are the things that our top reps are doing, and how can we replicate that? We had what we call a talent review, and it was such a valuable exercise to really understand where everyone was individually at that time, and each manager led us through their team. And it was eye-opening to see what needed to happen to prepare and work through the various pieces to help with the achievement, because I think we are heading into some interesting economical changes, and I just think we have to have conversations about it. And the last thing I would say is, we're going to still see some changes, but I'm a big believer, like no plan is perfect. And I always like to side or benefit the rep where we can. So if there is a decision to be made, and I'll give you an example, we made a little bit of an adjustment last quarter on a few reps in terms of quota, and it was interpreted one way by the rep, and it was meant or intended to be interpreted another way. So there was the spirit of the plan and the letter of the law, so to speak. And it was such an insignificant amount. We just said, hey, let's side with the rep, because that's going to mean a lot to that person, and I think that goes a long way. And then the last thing I'll mention here is just an example. One of my former CROs that I worked with, he gave me this example, and it always stuck with me when I think about this topic. There were a myriad of deals that this rep closed. However, there was one deal that was just off like $50. And so the CRO said, well, I'll just Venmo you $50 and we'll call it a day. Well, I think we all get it. That's not the answer, because if that one deal's wrong, they're all wrong. And so that's not solving the problem. So I think just general communication, leaning in, siding with the reps where you possibly can, where it's good business, that'll go a long, long way. Give them a win.
Yeah, I love it. Makes a ton of sense. Yeah, I think like the MO or the kind of message to folks listening is just like, once again, it's like, and this is where we've had like a ton of success with our ops and finance teams here when crafting plans, is just acknowledging that there are people behind the numbers. And and like, once again, just kind of doing our best in investing and kind of like building as much empathy cross-functionally for that reality as we can. So yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. And I think just maybe that's like a nice tee up for like, you use this example of like the CRO, someone was off by $50 and they sent a Venmo. Correct me if I'm wrong, but like Spiff software ensures that like everyone's getting paid the correct commission the first time around. Correct, Stan?
Yes, absolutely. And I apologize. I had to go off camera for just a second because my battery was dying, but I'm here and I'll be back on camera in 2 seconds. But 100%, when it comes to transparency and communication, visibility is equally as important. Reps just want to know how they're getting paid. And I think when we talk about recession proofing, just as much visibility as we can as leaders, and it doesn't have to necessarily be automated, but I'm a big believer in having an SLA, having very documented processes so that everyone knows what their job is, how they do it, when they need to deliver it, because reps just can't be on this hold pattern because it's just not productive. They're not focusing on revenue activities. So I'm a big believer in automation. That's what Spiff does. But where you can't, I do think having good communication, collaboration, SLAs amongst all the departments that drive commissions is super important.
Yeah, I love that. We have like participation agreements that we have folks sign when we update comp plans, and within that we're thoughtful to communicate kind of the commitments from kind of other parties, right? And so there's a question that came in from the chat that I think is pretty interesting. Not entirely relevant to this kind of recession proofing, but an interesting question. This is from Tori Morgan. The question is, what are your thoughts on comp being based on ongoing payments from customers? For example, if there's month-to-month pricing and 6 months after the sale, the client kind of like reduces the amount they pay, et cetera, should the rep get penalized for that revenue change? Jay, we're on annual contracts here. We try our best to do kind of annual or worst case kind of semi-annual payments. Like, I don't know.
I got a good answer for this one. This is if you go back into the last year, what we discontinued, we had there's a couple of problems I think with monthly payments that you have to figure out. They're not super easy to. One is our comp philosophy last year was, well, what we'll do is we'll track the monthly payments, and then once they hit 6 months, then we pay out the rep as like a full year ACV recognition. The problem with that was the tracking itself. It's really hard to figure out who's paid, who hasn't. And our payment system didn't just automatically flag at 6 months. It's something that was very manual. You know, as we were hearing earlier, like automation is everything. You know, that is the more manual things that you have to do with your comp plans. The one, it's more likely you're going to make a mistake. Two, it's just going to slow things down. And as Stan mentioned, like you don't want your reps worrying about anything, especially their paycheck. You just want them out there selling. So what we did this year actually was we decided to pay out 1/12 every month. It seems like we have an automation software as well. So what we did was once we set that as active, we actually just pay it out every month. And so if they stay on for a year, they get compensated for a full year's ACV. If they decide to cancel after 3 months, there's no need to penalize the rep because you didn't actually overcompensate them. It makes it much easier. And we found that our reps really latched onto that. They were like, hey, this actually makes a lot of sense to me. You know, I can get it now. It's paid for. There's no, you know, gentleman's handshake. And I think that's the problem too, when the agreement is like, well, it's a little bit of a vague area. So we're just going to say that we'll pay you. But then that opens the door to, well, we're not going to pay you for this because this didn't make sense. We just decided to get rid of that, full transparency to the rep, and make sure to just pay monthly.
Wow, that's really interesting. Stan, any hot takes on this idea of kind of paying out kind of incrementally as someone goes if they're on like a month-to-month contract, for example?
No, but it's surprisingly not atypical. I mean, we don't see like a large percentage of folks doing what Jay's doing, but it's a real intriguing concept, and I actually really like it. We'll add that to our side conversation, Jay, because I want to hear more about that too. But we are seeing some really unique things in market right now with plans in general. So I have seen that, not in large practice, but it's a really interesting concept. And I think, honestly, every stage is different. And when I think about comp plans and comp structure and how companies generally compensate, it does vary based on the life cycle that a company's in. So 0 to 1, 1 to 10, 10 to 25, 25. Yeah. It's all different in how companies are structuring their comp plans. You're going to see kind of the more traditional comp structures where you see, you know, the variable, which is, you know, 50-50 compensation. What you see is, you know, your standard components of, you know, just VCR, then accelerators. That, you know, tends to be pretty consistent. But when you go down market a little bit, I have seen some really unique things. And I think it comes down to, what are your core principles? Like, what are you trying to strive to hit, you know, the end state? And sometimes as a business, you just have to try different things to get to a point where you can be successful. And that's a really cool example.
Yeah. Awesome. Joni, let's go to the next slide, please. All right, cool. The third promised topic we talked about today, practicing data-driven management to put the goal into action. Once again, this is kind of broad, but like, we'll try to keep this as compensation focused as possible. I guess like I'm gonna kick it off with a kind of a different question. So when we think about kind of designing comp plans, or when we've looked at kind of comp, you know, our recruiting team and frankly our leadership team has had access to things like option impact and all these kind of like comp databases. We haven't explicitly talked about that yet. Like Jay, let's start with you. Like, how much, when you're building these comp plans, do you take into consideration available market data on comp?
Yeah, so a lot, you know, but it's very, you know, it's only worth, it's kind of like gold, right? It's worth whatever you'll pay for it. You know, there's so many different conflicting, you know, trends out there and reports out there. We get our best data from interviews. I mean, we really do. When we put an offer out and we see the reaction from a rep, oftentimes we kind of figure out what the bands are out in market, how active are they in interviewing. We do a ton of interviews every week. So we have some pretty good real-time data, but it doesn't mean that a good benchmark isn't valuable. There's a lot of good, there's Comp Gauge out there now for salespeople. There's, you know, Open Comp is another resource. There's a ton of them out there now that are, Bets Recruiting puts out an annual, you know, state of the market. And, you know, I consume all of that data because at least it helps me with a benchmark. So I consider that like, this is the general, we're going to go to market with these types of comp plans or these types of OTEs. And then I let my interview panels be the ones that help me tweak it to make sure that, because we also have a position where we're going to be in market. We're not going to be middle market. We like to be, at the upper echelon so that we can land really good talent. And so if we find out, for example, that we've been offering what we consider top talent 10% below market, we generally would just make the adjustment. We've also got a comp philosophy here where we don't do annual reviews. I think in sales, it's pretty easy to figure out, how someone's doing. It's a very transparent kind of role. But we do, and instead of doing merit adjustments or merit increases every year, we've actually committed as a company to doing market corrections. So if we bump one, we bump all, so that we can be a little bit closer to market based on the talent that we think we have in house. So it's a way for us to be transparent. It's a way for the reps to feel like they're still being paid at market. We are entering into a really interesting time. So I think retention is super, super important right now. So it's kind of like, especially for salespeople who are going to be the ones that do save the day, they're going to be the ones that bring in the revenue. It's not the time to go cheap. It's definitely the time to pony up extra cash or put in new spiffs, or even if you needed to do a market adjustment in order to make sure that everybody understands that we value them. Now is really the time to lean on that kind of strategy.
Yeah, Stan, what's your relationship been with kind of market data on comp when designing comp plans?
Yeah, we use the similar ones. Bets is one that I've used fairly recent and throughout. But Spiff also has some benchmarking data. As you can imagine, we have a lot of interesting data points around comp, and a lot of folks that leverage our system access certain benchmarking thresholds based on where are they in the percentile of comp in this role for SDR or AE or senior AE, and then so forth. And so we kind of eat our own dog food in that regard too when we're looking at certain data points, and our database continues to be stronger and stronger as folks opt in. But I love that idea of the interview, and I do think that's kind of the news that you get in real time, because I think everything else is a little bit delayed or based on historicals. I think last year, before we kind of headed into kind of some of these headwinds that we're seeing, it was insane, the salary demands at every level. And I used to have these percentages that I could just rattle off last year, but for SDR, it was over 30%. For AEs, it was over 30%. It was crazy in just a 12-month window. But I do think, for me personally, the number one thing I'm concerned about, it keeps me up at night, is retention. Retention of great talent. And I think that's why when I alluded to the exercise a little bit ago, I think it's super important to just make sure you're leaning in and understanding where the teams are, where the gaps are, and bolstering where you can. But it takes time. I think the data point is like 1.5 to 2x salary if someone leaves in terms of the cost of the company. And if I could be off, you guys probably know better than me, but it's pretty costly. And then, I mean, I don't know what everyone's ramp time is, but for us, it could be on the low end 3 to maybe more because we have an enterprise offering. And so, keep retaining talent and acquiring great talent, because I think it's also a great time to find really solid talent out there, because there's more in the market than there has been in the last couple of years. And just optimizing your hiring practice and how you're honing in on that, I think, is a real critical practice to make sure that you're bringing in the right talent to drive forward.
Yeah, I love it. And thanks for sharing, both of you, for that. Yeah, it's interesting. One last thing I'll touch on with this, like data, kind of being data driven with comp. I remember learning from a bunch of my friends who were kind of longtime Salesforce sales folks, like their philosophy looking at the kind of reps annual quota divided by their OTE, and like trying to be thoughtful about that ratio, and like trying to keep that ratio around 4. And I've seen surveys of like, I think, 900 plus kind of Series B through E VC-backed companies where the median kind of ratio is actually 4. We've never really paid much attention to that. We call that like the sales rep efficiency kind of number. Over here, it's historically been closer to like 6.5 to 7 has been our number. Is that a metric that you all have paid attention to at all? It's an easy one for like an early stage kind of founder, for a salesperson to be like, it's easy math for someone to do if they don't have something like a bets guide. But Jay, you're laughing. What, like, have you like leverage that at all?
I live and breathe in it. You know, it's that's actually how I designed most of our comp plans. And I will say that, you know, I think the median has changed quite a bit. We don't really have anybody in the like 7 or 8 range, but I know when I was before landing at Rumble, when I was on the market talking to a few folks about, you know, what their offerings are, I did see between like 6 and 8 sometimes. We try to keep our ratios between like 4 and 5. It's kind of narrow, and that way we don't leave too much to too much to try and digest based on like how senior the person is, and we give them a little bit more of a favorable rate. But I think that it's worked out really well for us. And again, like, I'm a simplicity person, so that's been the formula that's worked so well for us so far. It seems to, when we take into effect, you know, what our sales process is and how big our ASP is, and how long it's going to take for a rep to ramp up. For us, it's about 6 months in enterprise, and it's about 3 months in mid-market. That's somewhat industry standard. So we figured, you know what, this is working out, and it really aligns well with what we're hearing in the market. The thing that we'll adjust over anything else is we'll just adjust the compensation. If the OTE is too low, we go up an OTE to meet market. But the variable just kind of keeps us sane, so we know we're still getting the same, you know, return on investment for each rep that we hire.
Yeah. Stan, about yourself?
Yeah, I again, very similar. It's very common. And I'll maybe just speak to what we see generally with comp plans that we're automating. I think generally comp plans are overly complex. I mean, the big takeaway here for me is like it's amazing how many comp plans that I've evaluated where I'm like, I don't think anybody can understand. Like, I read it and I was having a hard time understanding it. And if that's the case, how are you going to be data driven? Like, how do you do that? Like, how do you help reps get that? And the one best practice I typically would recommend in that scenario is kind of similar to the SLA and having everybody aligned when it is overly complex. Because I get it, some products tend to just require certain components to a plan that drive and move the needle. But at the end of the day, it's just what are the most commonly asked questions? Just make it front and center. Just make it super easy to consume. But yeah, I think simplicity is definitely the key on plans. And I think just going back to being data driven, just having that visibility into whether it's a company dashboard, whether it's a Salesforce dashboard, if you have a BI platform, whatever your version of truth is, we have to have, in my opinion, goals and gamify it too. And that's why, one of the things that drew me to Spiff is just the ability, like, I can put any of my KPIs in a statement. I can put in what their quarterly attainment is, their annual attainment. I can put in other KPIs for SDRs, meeting goals, how they're tracking, how they stack rank. And that's all in real time. And wherever one puts that, I think it's really important that when those goals are created, to make it front and center so everyone sees it. It creates a conversation that is proactive, because data, the one thing I love about data, it's not emotional. It's just fact.
Yeah. Piggybacking on that real quick, or just like kind of ancillary, maybe we haven't talked about this, but I'll just ask you, Stan, who has been responsible for communicating comp plan changes to the org? And how have you actually communicated those changes kind of historically? Because this is one where, like, I think, this is one where a lot of folks out there, especially kind of earlier stage folks that are introducing these things, might be changing them for the first time. Yeah. Like, this is one where, like, there are good ways of doing this and there are bad ways. So I'm curious.
Yeah, I've seen them all and I've done them all. And I've been the perpetrator of the uproars. I would say that for me, scenarios where you just make a change without any collaboration, and I'll explain what I mean by that in just a second, but just, here's the change. And then you have some, sales meeting to go over the changes, have some FAQs at the end, and then call it a day. That's to me the wrong approach. The right approach to me is I usually have a committee that I build when it comes to comp plans, and I'll usually bring in always the leaders before we roll anything out, because they're on the front lines. They're hearing things that VPs or CROs just don't hear on a frequent basis. And then we'll also bring in a subset of AEs to have conversations around the why. It's always about the why. Why are we making the changes?
Yeah.
And if we can, in one of my recent leader came in, my new CRO, and one of the points of feedback that he gave me when I introduced him, and I'll come back to conclude on this in this thought, but when I was introducing him, it was, hey, this is our new CRO, and he had an opportunity to introduce his family, himself, and just generally why he's excited about the opportunity. And then, what questions do you have? And it was a little bit quiet. It was a very quiet group, and he gave me some feedback, like, Stan, always have a few in the crowd that are ready to ask questions. And in a very similar way, I've applied that in many other areas as well, because that's a lesson learned for me. Because a comp plan is really important, and if you mess with a comp plan's or AE's comp plan, they don't understand the why. I think it's going to create that same problem, that the inefficiencies, the manual processes when it comes around comp causes, which is general, just static, not revenue producing activities, and just overall, just, no one's singing from the same sheet of music, so to speak. And so I think just generally, I like and side with over communication. I like driving committees. I like having discussions. I don't over rotate, but I like bringing people in so that when it comes to the change, the why is really clear. And I've got a subset of AEs. I've got all the leaders aligned, and we're rolling it out. So that's what I'd like to do.
Yeah, I love that. Really easy framework for anyone here that's listening to adopt. Appreciate you sharing that. We've got less than 10 minutes to go here. I want to get to some of these questions. There are a few more that just popped up. This one specifically for Jay. When we think about that kind of annual quota to comp ratio, the question from Alex is, do you factor in LTV into that equation? Right? Because Alex acknowledges that Salesforce has exceptionally strong retention rates, so they can make money back on the LTV. We didn't, but it was so early, I think, in our kind of life as a business. But do you take that into consideration?
Well, it's a couple things. On the back end, finance is always going to take that into consideration, right? Because you're paying upfront for something you're recognizing over a couple of years' time. So it's a little bit of a different. You could get into a contest of speaking in different languages. I think what we did was we looked at our net retention, said, "Wow, it's really good," and felt really good about where we were in terms of our percentages. We evaluate that all the time. We're tracking net. Actually, we started an account management program a little bit earlier this year that handles renewals for mid-market. And one of the components of their compensation is actually net retention. So we're always thinking about it. And we think for us, it's hard to calculate LTV when your company's only been around for a couple of years. So that's something that we're tracking. But didn't really think too much about that when we designed the comp plan. We were really more so thinking, we just want to pay people well to bring new logos onto the company. We want to pay people well that are going to land and expand. And that's the way that we've designed our comp plan. Again, I think I've said this probably too many times at this point, but simplicity for me is key. I want to be able to just look at anybody's comp plan, understand, did we design this thing the right way with the company's best intentions in mind? And if the answer to those is yes, I don't want to overcomplicate it.
Yep. I love it. Cool. Thank you for answering. 2 more questions here. And I acknowledge that we've been predominantly talking about AE comp here, not explicitly BDR comp. And I give that context here with the question from Tori. What about startups with very few sales? Would you comp more for each sale, or would you consider comping on product demos done? I'm going to go out and say we would not comp on product demos done for an AE, but we will comp BDRs on sales qualified opportunities that are created. And more often than not, we know whether or not those opportunities are created, after an initial qualification call and or a product demo. Anyone else want to add any color to that?
Yeah, I'll just give a use case. We had we have a particular competitor that has pretty long-standing contract, and so the challenge that we had is, SDRs would book a meeting, but our qualification criteria says it has to be an opportunity within X time frame, and so it kind of created this friction of being able to talk to a very solid opportunity, but long-term opportunity that we still have interest in, but no one is going to get paid off of that based on the criteria set. So we had to pivot, we had to adjust, we had to create a unique way of being able to foster those conversations so that, those long tail sales cycles would promote opportunities for us, 12 to 24 months from now. And so for the SDR in this regard, we just created a new criteria based on this one competitor, and we did pivot based off that. And so I think with the startup, it's always an iterative process, and it kind of goes back to the stages that we talked about. You just, whether you're 0 to 1, 1 to 10, you have to be creative to drive the results you're looking for. And sometimes you get up, you have a hypothesis, you test it, and you fail. Great, you learn something, and pivot and iterate and test again. And it just takes, and that kind of goes to a question that was asked, like at least from what I was seeing, which is basically, you adjust your comp plan frequently. The answer from my perspective is I like to create consistency because it takes time to know if it works or not. So changing it constantly, I think, is a challenge to know if it works. But I also, it kind of depends on the stage of business one's in. I do think based on what you're seeing in the market, it may require a quick pivot in comp.
Yeah. I think once again, it's like, is there downside to changing it frequently? It's, Stan, you mentioned earlier, just like the importance of kind of the communication piece around this and communicating the why. And there's just a lot of calories that, go into that. And so, if you're ready to make the investment in kind of showing that you've done the math and you have a good business justification for the change, to your point, every company is unique, and there may be instances where companies need to revisit these comp plans more frequently than others. But without the communication of the why, what's the downside? Mistrust, and and kind of the theme of this whole conversation, which is you risk losing reps.
That is 100% right, which is basically the trust factor. Once you lose a rep's trust, they're gone. Yeah. And I'm not over exaggerating. Once they have lost trust in the business and in their leader, it's not a good recipe of long-term longevity of the company.
Yeah, awesome. We got a few minutes left. Let's maybe some parting words. Jay, let's start with you. Anything you want to say as a final takeaway?
Yeah, I think that the last thing I would say, if you're building comp plans or you're participating in comp plans, I guess you could be both, like myself. Then I think transparency and collaboration is definitely the key. If you're feeling that your comp plan is not right and you're an account executive or a BDR or a sales engineer, I think that it's okay. You should be okay flagging that and saying, hey, this isn't working and here's why, and just working collaboratively with your manager. I wouldn't know that some of the stuff in our comp plans were broken unless my rep said, hey, this is not working for me. And I think that just in parting, take that with you. And if you feel like your comp plan's janky, especially after having this conversation today, you should talk to your manager.
Yeah, I love it. Stan?
I would say that my marketing team put together this phenomenal piece of content, which is basically an ebook for reps that want to have a conversation with their leadership team on creating a better commissions process, which is what Jay was just talking about. How do you have that conversation? I'll have Joni put it in the notes, but it's a letter that we wrote that basically says, here are some things that you should be looking at, and this is how to have that conversation so that you can foster an environment of collaboration and transparency around this commissions motion, which is really important for the organization as a whole to have.
Cool. Awesome. Well, gents, I enjoyed this chat. I learned a lot. This is fun. Stan, enjoy the beach. Jay, enjoy the heat. Joni,
Absolutely.
welcome back.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Any final takeaways from you, Eric?
No, I think once again, I think it's really important to remember that there are humans behind the numbers, and that you're going to have to draw lines in the sand, and you're going to be in a position where some companies are going to have more data to kind of help make a decision than others, and you're going to make mistakes, and it's okay. I think the key thing is, to Stan's point, it's doing your best to be thoughtful around the communication piece. So that's been a big lesson learned from my experience with this, and making sure that you communicate the why and that you own the why. So yeah, this is fun.
Awesome. Absolutely. Well, thank you all so much for being here today. And thank you everyone for attending. We've loved having you here. Thank you to Spiff, of course. Love working with them always. They're doing great things over there. So be sure to check them out, especially if you want some comp plan tips, as we've heard. So appreciate everyone. We'll have all the follow-up and key takeaways coming to you soon. It'll be on our website, and look out for an email from me with all the